Within the Hearthstone rank system, the players are represented by two separate yet equally important groups: the meta breakers, who investigate deck synergies, and the net deckers, who prosecute the meta breakers. These are their stories. The Mon Disorder mini set has been live for about 3 days, and I think I'm confident in saying I know what the best decks to climb the Legend are. In this video, I'm going to spotlight 5 different decks that you can easily pilot to Legend, as well as some other decks that I think not necessarily are the best in the game, but the most interesting that I've seen that utilize the new cards. So if you guys enjoy these kind of decks, feel free to like this video and subscribe to the YouTube channel for even more channel updates. Let's go ahead and start this list off strong by showcasing what is probably the best way to play Druid right now. And one thing that I have to point out is that we are no longer playing Miracle-Growth. Why is that? Because Due Process exists, and this card is currently bugged, and I'll get to that bug here in a minute. But this deck is actually pretty insane, even when the bug isn't effectively scamming games, and like I said, I'll get to that here in a second. But the thing is about this deck is we don't have any cards that are really that expensive anymore. Like, we still have, like, you know, these 7, 9, 10 drops, but when you play Guff, suddenly that doesn't even matter. So when you play Due Process and when you go up against other Druids that also have this card, this deck actually has a surprising way of being able to cycle through its hand space very, very effectively. Because looking at the curve, it's completely different than what it used to be when you had a bunch of 8 mana cards and debatably even more 10 mana cards, depending on how you wanted to build this deck. Because some people were putting Jailer in this as well. But in any case, the Due Process synergy works really well with Far Watch Post, which is why a lot of people are putting this in the deck now. Because especially if you play Due Process at the beginning of the game, especially against decks that aren't Druid, they don't have a lot of ways of emptying out their hand space. So if you play Due Process into Far Watch Post as early as you can, you're going to be filling up their hand to where they're going to be easily milling cards. And if you get Due Process out of Moonlit Guidance, like, it's just absolutely insane. Now, what is the bug that is currently surrounding Due Process right now? It's kind of interesting because if you guys remember how Pounce used to work with Wildheart Guff, then it's very similar to that. What's going on with Due Process is if you play it before you play your hero card, the Due Process will treat this as like a new hero entering the field. So if you play one Due Process before you play your Guff, once you play Guff, it's like you've played 2 Due Processes. And the thing with this hero card bug is that it also works if your opponent plays their hero card. I had a game where I literally played both of my Due Processes against a Hunter, and then they played their Beastalker Tavish, and then suddenly they were drawing 5 cards a turn, even though I didn't even get Moonlit Guidance out of this. Like, this is such a weird bug that has been addressed, or is at least, you know, on their known bugs list. So this is something that's going to get fixed hopefully soon, but it's probably not going to get fixed for like another week or 2. And it's kind of funny how, like, Due Process is already an amazing card to begin with, and now this other way of utilizing this bug is actually massive, especially with countering Hunter, countering Mage, any class that's playing a hero card right now, and that's pretty much like half the meta. So Druid is kind of unfair in that aspect, and I don't know if playing this deck is morally acceptable when you do something like this and you have such a counter to hero cards. But aside from that, this deck is still really sweet because we get to play Sylvanas the Accused. There's not a lot of decks that I see that are running this card to, you know, actual success, because killing 7 minions is a tall order in anything that's not Hunter or is not Druid, apparently. Hunter has some more decks that are all about generating token minions, but I'm just going to go ahead and tell you that Rat Hunter, not on my list. I don't think it's that good. At least not compared to what we're seeing right now. I don't think it makes the top 5. It might make top 10, top 15 if I'm being generous. But regardless, this deck has a decent amount of new cards, but it's still the same thing as ever, with Sire Denathrius Brand being the main win con. You could put the Jailer in this deck, but I don't think it's a good idea if you're trying to go for Due Process shenanigans. I think the Jailer is its own style of deck where you have to play a little bit more defensively and go for like huge armor swings. But this is essentially just what Sire Druid used to be, except we've cut Miracle-Growth, we have Due Process scams, as well as the typical thing that Druid likes to do with gaining mana, and we even have Sylvanas to steal minions in a tough situation. This deck feels like it has everything, and I don't imagine that Sire Denathrius Druid is going anywhere in this meta. Meaning that this deck is not going anywhere. The next deck on this list is going to be a very simple one, but it's a very effective deck nonetheless that doesn't even utilize any new cards. It's just Imp Curse Warlock. Right now in this meta of Hunters, which I'll go ahead and spoil it, the Hunter deck's up next, guys. I can't deny how good Hunter is right now with it having a 60% win rate. But this is one of the decks that people are trying to counter Hunter with, and I feel like it's kind of successful. The data is almost like, this is like a 45% for the Beast Hunter, 50% depending on where exactly in the meta that you're, or where in the ladder that you're residing right now. But this deck also beats everything else. Like, it's amazing how good Warlock is if you were to take Hunter out of the equation. It can beat up on Demon Hunters pretty effectively. This deck has the curse packages, so that way it's pretty good into Priests, and Priests have been kind of falling out from what I've seen, and I'm not really sure why, but I'll go ahead and spoil it. I don't think there's any Priest decks in this video, which is like the first time in a long time. But the aggressive meta is starting to take fold, and this is just one of those decks that can obviously win the game by turn 3 if you do your Fiendish Circle Vile Library combo, and then you supplement it with a bunch of other curses. I don't really think I need to walk through every little detail about this deck because it's very straightforward, but one thing that I will highlight about this deck is that I've seen Grandmasters play this, and they do not play it the simple way that you think you would, where you just, like, you know, flame imp into build board into all of this stuff. Like, I remember watching Possessi play this deck, and he, like, tapped on turn 2 and turn 3 in, I think, the Mirror, or like, another, like, somewhat aggressive matchup, and he was actually playing for the control style of this deck by having, like, Abyssal Waves ready to go, removing and just building up the curses to where Tamsin Curse combo easily won the game. So this is a deck that can kind of fool you with how simple it can be, but its gameplay can go a lot farther than you think it can. So I would argue to make sure that you know when to go for the aggressive combo against decks that can't handle wide boards, and when to go for the curse combo when you're going up against a deck that might be able to deal with your board, and then suddenly it's all about how many resources you have. So turn 2, turn 3 committing to tapping suddenly doesn't seem that bad of an idea. But Curse Imp Warlock, very simple deck. But I think that it's an easy deck compared to the other decks that are on this list that you could easily hit Legend with. Next up is going to be a deck that actually showcases a decent amount of new cards, because as it turns out, Sightless Magistrate is a really freaking good card in a deck that plays its entire hand by turn 2 sometimes because of Bibliomite, and we even have the new card Dispose Evidence as well. This card's been a thing for a while, but it wasn't as powerful as people would have hoped, because the synergy with Magnifying Glaive wasn't enough to push this card over the edge. Like, it's a good burst tool. I'm not saying that it's a bad card by any means, but now that we have the Sightless Magistrate going in this deck as well, the stonks on this just go up tremendously. So now we have several ways of being able to shuffle cards into our deck and make use of these draw until we have 3 cards, draw until we have 5 cards. And there's a funny way that I've actually lost to this deck, and I'm going to be showcasing this in a future video. So if you like these deck guides and you want to see more content of some goofy stuff, again, feel free to hit that subscribe button, guys. I've been doing everything I can to make as much content as possible, and any means to support me is going to keep this train going, I would say. But in any case, I think that this deck is extremely good. My friend Dabs was able to get top 50 with this deck, and I think that this is probably the best way to play it. Trogs just don't seem that good because you need the big board as soon as possible, and if you don't play Trog by turn 1, turn 2, it's just kind of a dead card. The rest of the minions in this deck can at least do something if you don't hit the most prime time to hit them, like Vicious Slither Spear on turn 1, Metamorphin on turn 1 or turn 2 with Coin and a Fell Spell. Like, those are all well and good and all, but these cards can still be good later into the game to try and, push that last bit of damage that you need, or if you just need minions to make Kurtrus Demon Render deal that last sweet amount of damage. But in any case, this is a very all or nothing deck. If you're fighting a lot of 40 card decks that have a lot of life gain, like Spooky Mage, for example, this deck is not going to do the greatest. It's got a kind of bad win rate against Hunter, but in all things considered, this thing does beat on everything else, and if it wasn't for the Hunter matchup, I think that this deck would debatably be one of the most powerful decks in the game, if not like the top 3 most powerful decks. Like, I think that Aggro Demon Hunter has gotten a lot of gas, but it's just very dependent on decks that gain a lot of armor or remove the board frequently. But in any case, if you're looking for another simple deck that can easily climb to Legend very quickly, this is another recommendation that I have. Just watch out for 40 card decks as well as Hunters. The next deck is Beast Hunter, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about this deck, but I will say that it's kind of shocking that the best deck that is currently for Beast Hunter right now only runs 1 new card, and when I was looking at the stats, it was not performing very well. So I really don't even know if Beast Hunter even cares about any of the new cards that they have received in this meta. Like, unfortunately, none of the neutrals just really hit the spot of this deck where it really wants to thrive. You could put like Sylvanas in here, but I feel like that card is just not as impactful in this deck because you just want to go for pressure. Stealing minions doesn't really work all too frequently in my experience. Slate Hound doesn't really make sense in this deck because you don't play enough beasts, and the reason why I feel like Nathanos isn't good enough is because look at the death rattles that are available in this deck. You have Rat King, which I don't even think it goes dormant. Oh, no. Okay, yeah, so it goes dormant, but it doesn't get the revive, so that's just a useless death rattle. You have Asharan Saber, which can either give you the one at the bottom of the deck or the one that goes to the bottom of your deck. You get that death rattle, and you can summon a beast from your deck. Or you get Hydrolodon, or you get Mountain Bear. The best one of all of these is definitely the Summon the Beast, but I feel like the most consistent, average value you're gonna get out of this card is out of Mountain Bear, and I don't really think this deck cares all too much about going that wide. And another card that I'm not seeing in this deck is Ramming Mount. I think Ramming Mount is an amazing card that should go in most of these decks, due to the fact that it just solos games sometimes. Like, I would even argue taking out like a selective breeder to make room for 2 Ramming Mounts. The new cards just really don't benefit Beast Hunter, and all of this is doing is just showing that this deck needs to be nerfed. What cards do I think need to be nerfed? Harpoon Gun, as well as Pet Collector. I think these cards cheat out way too much mana, and if you start with these cards, maybe you don't have to nerf the Wild Seeds quite yet. Maybe you don't have to nerf a lot of the damage potential that Hunter has, because these cards are the ones that I find the most frustrating when I lose to, because it generates, you know, the ridiculous Hydrolodon turns, the Mountain Bear turns that stop aggro decks. Aggro Demon Hunter hates this card on turn 4. I literally could see it automatically because there's just no way to beat it. And that's the main problem with these style of decks, is that there's just no way to beat it, and I cannot stand seeing Hydrolodon on turn 4 anymore, Blizzard. So if anything needs to be done, I think that's what's up. And the last deck on this list is going to be Spooky Mage, but I have a little secret to tell you. This is not the actual deck that you want to be playing right now, and for the rest of this deck spotlight, I'm going to use the name Spooky Mage, but I'm going to be talking about a different deck because I don't want anybody else to know about this deck, okay? But Spooky Mage is one of the best decks in this format right now due to the fact that the new cards just work so well in it. Having a 0 mana 6/6, a counter minion play, as well as having literal randomness just completely throw normal Hearthstone out the window and just let the RNG gods handle it. This deck is absolutely toxic, and there's a reason why I'm saying that Spooky Mage is the best mage deck right now, because again, I don't want anybody to know about this at all because it's just so freaking annoying to go up against this. And apparently No Hands Gamer was able to reach top 100 legends, so he's already going to be getting more people influenced by this deck, sense of how many people he streamed this out to yesterday, and not to mention the Twitter post is doing absolutely amazing right now. So this deck is probably going to see its time in the spotlight if it is actually as powerful as people think. But the reason why I'm putting it up here is because I've almost conceded against this deck every single time that Orion Mansion Manager comes out. This card is absolutely busted. If you haven't already seen the Cantaloupe clip, there's a clip of him literally playing into secret, 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 to where even after he started his turn with an equality, putting this thing at 1 HP, he ended his turn and this thing was, I think, at 9 or 11 HP. It's ridiculous what this card can do, and it automatically like takes normal Hearthstone out the window, because if you do an action, a secret reveals, and then suddenly you have another action, like all it feels like you're gonna do is feed into your opponent. So this is the ultimate definition of how secrets are very tilting. Oh wait, I said the word. Oh no. Okay. I have to wrap this up. I don't want anybody else to know about this. But long story short, this deck is busted, and if I ever catch you playing this against me, I will hold it against you for the rest of your life. Now we're gonna move into some of the fun decks here, and I wanted to showcase what Jailer Paladin used to be at the beginning of this mini set, because a lot of changes have been made, and I still like argue that this is one of the best ways to play the deck right now if you're looking to play control Jailer Paladin. However, there is one deck in particular that I want to highlight because this has got to be the goofiest deck that I think I have seen in this expansion, and it's going to be probably one of my next videos coming up soon with just like, you know, not too much of a deck breakdown, but some funny clips of this deck doing insanely well. So, freaking, what's going on here? We have the Jailer, we have Kael'thas, we have Cavalry Horn, and we have Invigorating Sermon. What is happening with this deck because the rest of it is 1 and 2 drops? Well, it's very simple. This is a deck that wants to play Order in the Court as soon as possible, because if you are able to draw into your Jailer, your Kael'thas, and then on turn 5 or turn 4 with coin, you play Cavalry Horn, your next turn is going to be busted if you have 2 minions in hand as well as the Kael'thas and the Jailer. And it's very important that you have these 2 minions in hand, which is why your turn 4 is literally a card that doesn't really benefit you until the Jailer comes down, and I'll get to that in a second. But the combo with this deck is after you've destroyed the Cavalry Horn, and you have, say, 2 1-drops, a Kael'thas, and a Jailer, what happens is you play your 2 1-drops, you crack the Cavalry Horn in order to bring out the Kael'thas. You've already played 2 minions because of the 1-drops, so that means that your Jailer is now available for 0 mana. This is the fastest way to play the Jailer right now, and it's actually somewhat effective of being a good cheese deck, in all honesty, because once you have this board, like, it's not going anywhere, and then you have Invigorating Sermon to give you a little bit more damage. Like, it's not the greatest, but it's the only way to make this deck work, and it still gives it a buff even after you popped off the combo, and gives you, you know, something to do with your mana after you've played the Jailer. But this deck is extremely goofy. It's completely reliant on hitting Order in the Court or a Stonehearth Vindicator, which is why this deck is full of a bunch of 1-drops and 2-drops, because you don't care about any other spell. You just care about getting the Order in the Court, playing it, and then getting the Jailer on the field before your opponent eventually rushes you down. And that's the reason why we're running Prince Renathal in the deck, is because we need the 40 HP to kind of guarantee that we don't just die to aggro, because if you get 2 turns to swing with this deck, it is over. It is just over, dude. Some people have actually put Cariel in this deck. I'm not sure about that because this deck doesn't really want to go to 8 mana. But, I mean, in all honesty, you could do it to maybe give it some gas against some slower decks. But in all honesty, it's all about the Jailer. It's all about just not dying to fatigue. I think adding more minions to this deck makes it, or adding extra cards to this deck just makes this complicated, and it's already all in as is. So there's no point in trying to tech this deck when it's already so volatile and so glass cannon-y. So if you want to play a goofy deck, this is definitely the way to do it. However, I was not able to maintain at 50%. Phenope climbed with this deck in top 10 EU. Didn't play it for very long, but maintained an even win rate. So even at top legend, it does have a chance. But more importantly, this is just the most fun deck that I've seen in this expansion. Next up is going to be one of the only ways to probably play Hedge Maze, because Death Rattle Druid just isn't really a thing. But I have to admit something, guys. I lost to this deck. I don't remember what I was playing. I think I was playing Jailer Paladin or something that was a bit slow, but I ended up losing to the guy that played Explosive Sheep into Hedge Maze and completely wiped out my board. This is such a weird deck that I feel like I had to spotlight it, because it also runs Azumat. Like, whoever built this deck, I think it was McBannerface, but whoever built this deck is an absolute Giga Chad in trying to make this card work. And I also ended up like going up against Kolak in my game versus this guy. And again, I lost to this deck because the sheep turn destroyed my board to the point where I couldn't deal enough damage, and then he was just gaining a bunch of armor and, you know, got out of range of whatever amount of damage that I had. But this deck is just really, really cool. I don't think that it's going to see that much play, unfortunately, because this is just way too slow. And if you play this deck against a due process deck, you are going to just get absolutely milled. But this is one way that I feel like some people are trying to make this work. You have like the strategy of doing what you want to do with the due process, but you also have plenty of removal in order to, you know, play cards meaningfully, destroy your opponent's tempo while you're building up your game plan of eventually, you know, playing your Sire, playing I guess that's really the only win con is the Sire in this deck. But there's also the possibility of just removing, and then, you know, you have Mutanus eating a win con. I don't think there's anything else really going much for this deck, but I had to highlight it because I did lose to it. So, you know, maybe there's a chance for this deck. But if you want my honest opinion, just play the due process Druid. It's a lot better than this. The next 3 decks are very spicy, and this deck is extremely spicy. I only played 2 games with this deck, but I think it's immediately better than the deck that I was playing for 20 games, which was much worse. And the reason why I feel like this deck is better is because it has more AoE options. My deck was all in on just trying to make the combo happen as soon as possible, and I kid you not, I have thrown over 2,000 ranks in order to combo with this deck. I started the season at rank 100, like 67 or something like that. And currently I am sitting at rank 2,414 because I easily threw over 20 games trying to make this combo work. I have done it twice, and I don't know if it's worth it at the end of the day. I might lose my 11-star bonus, but once I make the video, we'll see what happens. But if you're looking for a fun deck to play that utilizes one of the new spells that's, I really don't know how this is supposed to be good, but this is the only way that I could think to make this work into a deck that does make sense. So in case you guys aren't following on what this combo is trying to do, we're trying to make an Elwynn Sword combo. We have to kill off our 2 copies of Elwynn, and then we have Tamsin Roam, as well as Habia's Corpses, I'm probably not pronouncing this correctly, in order to give us back essentially 4 more Elwynn. You have Zola to give yourself another Elwynn, and you can knock that out in order to give you the sword. There's also another way to pop off this combo, which I feel like is the most consistent, but it's dependent on rod discounts in order to make this happen. There's a way to do the combo if you've only killed 1 boar, but if you have 1 boar dead, and you play Tamsin into Zola, play the other Tamsin, and you have both of the corpses ready to go, then you can bring back 6 boars all in 1 turn. However, this is very dependent on your opponent having a minion on the field, because you need to trade the boar into something, since it does get rush. Another weakness of this deck is that if you're looking at how many minions there are, or how many potential for minions there are, there's more than 3. And that was my other problem with this deck when I tried to build it, is that I tried to make sure that I never had more than 3 minions at a time. And the way, like, the minions that you'll have die are going to be your Elwynn, even if you take out the Mistress of Mixtures, even though I don't run this in the deck. You're going to have this in the mix as well. You have imps from the Wicked Shipment and the Fiendish Circle. The imps from Dreadlich Tamsin count as their own minions, so that adds another minion to the slot. You also have Entitled Customer. So this deck has a lot more minions, but it's aimed to keep itself alive, which was the big problem that my other deck had. And like, I just kept dying to anything that generated a board, and it just really sucks. This deck is not good, is pretty much what I'm trying to tell you. But man, did I throw a lot of ranks trying to pop this off, and Tice's version just feels like one of the best ways in order to play this deck and not feel absolutely abysmal while trying to pop off the combo. I did it on the first game, and then immediately lost the next game, and then immediately gave up. But I think that this deck had some potential to be the goofiest deck of this expansion. And well, if Jailer Paladin turn 5 combo wasn't a thing, I would argue this is the goofiest deck right now. But if you want to play Elwynn, this is the way to do it. Next up is one of the only ways I believe that you can play Warrior in Standard right now, and this is yet another Tice deck that I was able to squeeze a decent amount of wins with. And the other reason why I'm highlighting this deck is because I played this deck 5 times, and my 3 losses, there was 1 game that I absolutely couldn't win, but the other 2 games were extremely close. Like, I mean, like 1 damage off lethal, 1 mana off lethal. If I had done literally 1 little small change within the game, I would have won without a problem. So this deck actually had a surprising amount of consistency to it, because one thing that I absolutely love about this deck is the weapon synergy, and I was able to make an 11 attack weapon with this deck on my stream the other day. I ended up getting a very big hammer, and the reason why I was able to generate a big hammer was because I had played Bran into double weapon expert. And then I had top decked Lady Ashvane. My opponent did not kill my Bran, so I got +6 onto this blacksmithing hammer, and it just won the game. Long story short, it won the game. And that's pretty much what this deck is trying to do. You make big weapons by maintaining synergy with your pirates to draw cards that, you know, give you an insane payoff. Like this can draw a minion, give it +1/+1, or it can draw a weapon, give it +1/+1. Having a 4-mana 4/4 Outrider Axe can be very impactful, but this deck does kind of have the weakness of what Warrior is known for right now, and that's if like 1 or 2 turns go unanswered, you just kind of die. So it's kind of important for you to use your resources as effectively as possible and to master the mulligan with this deck, because if you run out of resources, you are pretty much out of luck with this deck. And that's just one weakness that I don't feel like Warrior is really going to get over until we get a brand new expansion of cards, because let's be honest, the Cast on Nathria Warrior set was probably one of the most low power level sets that we've ever seen for a class. And unfortunately, Control Warrior is absolutely decimated, even though we still run this card at 4 mana, because it's still a powerful card. It's just been very much drawn back, because the difference between 3 and 4 mana is the difference between like an aggro and a mid-range card. So regardless, I think that this deck has a lot of potential. However, it is Warrior, so play this deck with caution. It is kind of expensive, so definitely don't invest any dust in this if you're trying to climb the ladder. But I think that this is the best way to play Warrior, so I had to highlight it for that reason. And the last deck that we're going to go over is Relic Demon Hunter, because there's a lot of people saying that Relic Demon Hunter is one of the best decks in the game right now, except I, for some reason, cannot seem to mimic that same result. I am putting this in the fun decks category because I believe the best way to play Relic Demon Hunter is still with the with the Fel version of the deck. That's all in on using more damage cards, playing Jace, as well as playing the Lifesteal weapon. I feel like for some reason there's just not enough people playing this Lifesteal weapon when you have, you know, Kirch's Demon Render coming out for 0 mana. But the rest of the deck also does have a bunch of weapon buffs, and this deck doesn't have any, so putting this in here just kind of feels like you're double dipping into too many archetypes. But regardless, this is Fino's version of the deck that he's been climbing with for the past couple of days. I don't think this list has changed all too much from his first variant from the beginning of the expansion, but it does highlight the new cards, the Jailer, as well as Prosecutor Meltranix. And I think that this card is pretty good. I don't know how good it is, though. It's won games against me that I was playing like something like a combo deck, or there's been times where I've been playing a slow Druid deck and it just completely skips my turn because my far left card is Sire Denathrius and my top deck is, well, let's be honest, my top decks are garbage. So unless your opponent is able to play their far right card consistently, they're not really going to be able to play around this card. So you can time this almost like you time your Blade Master Okani in a very meaningful way to stop your opponent from pretty much doing anything, and that's how you can easily solo some games. You've also got the Jailer in this deck, and if you can play him, you know, as early as turn 6 after you play the Reliquate Dimensions, sometimes it can win a game. But then fatigue happens, and this deck doesn't play Prince Renathal, so you are very volatile to just kind of getting removed. But there's not really a lot of removal decks going on right now. Like I said earlier, Priest not doing so hot right now, and there's no way in hell people are playing Twisting Nether and Warlock. So this deck has a lot of potential. I think this is the best way to play a high roll Relic Demon Hunter deck, because you still have Topple the Idol as, you know, a great way to get a lot of damage, and the curve of this deck did kind of go up since the addition of these legendaries did go in. But I still think that the best way to play the deck is going to be the Fel Demon Hunter deck. I don't have the deck made right now for this video while I'm recording, but I will have that deck code down below this particular deck in case you guys want to play a Relic Demon Hunter that can actually climb the ladder a little bit more confidently, in my opinion. But here you go. Here's a fun Demon Hunter deck. We've had a lot of weird changes to Demon Hunter in this expansion, but it's finally a class that I feel like is respectable in terms of win rate. I just kind of wish that Warrior had a way of being able to match this now that Paladin also has a playable deck. But Demon Hunter is looking like a good class right now. But there you guys have it. Those are my votes for the top 5 best decks to play, as well as the top 5 spiciest decks that I have seen since I started playing the mini set this expansion. And I think that the Maw and Disorder mini set has a lot to offer, but it's just a big question on how much are these cards going to be able to dictate the meta, like the Jailer, for example. I think the Jailer is one of the coolest cards out there, but as every single day passes, it's looking like it's not going to be a meta-relevant card except in maybe 1 or 2 decks, which I feel like is good, because if every single deck was playing the Jailer, it would be absolutely kind of fun, in my opinion, but also kind of ridiculous, especially if you take a look at what Wild is experiencing right now. But in any case, thank you for making it to the end of this video. If you enjoy this kind of content, feel free to like this video and subscribe to the YouTube channel, and let us know what kind of decks you're looking forward to, because I have a lot of different content coming out that honestly I'm having a bit of issues trying to organize all by myself. But in any case, plenty of content is on the way. Thank you guys for making it to the end of this video, and we'll see you for the next one.